All right, so let's unpack this. You've sent us some pretty fascinating documents on the Gambia's proposed budget for 2025.
Yeah.
We're talking detailed financial estimates. We're looking at their strategic plans, and even a glimpse into this shift toward program-based budgeting.
Yeah, PPB.
PBB, for those in the know.
For those in the know, that's right. It looks like you're really trying to gauge whether this budget is actually credible and how it links back to the country's ambitions for development.
Yeah.
So we'll be diving deep into all the numbers. We'll look at the priorities and hopefully uncover some insightful surprises along the way.
Sounds good.
One thing that jumps out at me immediately is that the Gambia seems to be walking this economic tightrope. We've got inflation and debt casting a shadow.
Yeah.
Yet there's this undeniable push for growth and this push for poverty reduction.
Right.
So are these plans realistic, or is this just political posturing?
Well, that's the question, isn't it?
Let's find out.
What's fascinating is that the budget projects a GDP growth of 5.8%.
So on the surface, it's a rosy picture.
It does sound pretty good.
Yeah.
I have a feeling there's more to this story, though.
Of course there is.
You don't just send us a stack of budget documents for a casual chit-chat.
No. This is a deep dive.
Exactly.
So if we connect this projected growth to the bigger picture, you'll see that while it's encouraging, inflation is still a major concern.
Right. The documents do mention that inflation has been trending downwards.
Yes.
Since early 2024.
It has been.
But it's still a far cry from that central bank's 5% target.
A long way off, yeah. And that's not the only challenge, of course.
Okay, what else?
The Gambia is also aiming to stabilize its exchange rate,
right,
which is heavily influenced by external factors, things like foreign investments and global commodity prices.
So a lot of factors outside of their immediate control.
Exactly.
It feels like they're building this budget on kind of shaky ground.
There's definitely an element of that, and we can't ignore the potential impact of global economic slowdowns or geopolitical tensions, and even climate change.
Yeah.
These are all significant risks that could derail even the most well-intentioned budget plans.
It's like they're trying to build a house of cards in a windstorm.
Ooh, I like that analogy.
Yeah.
And to complicate matters even further, they're also dealing with internal challenges, such as ensuring a reliable electricity supply.
Right, so the economic backdrop is a mixed bag.
It is.
Of optimism
yes,
and some very real hurdles.
Absolutely.
Now let's get down to brass tacks. How are they planning to generate revenue?
Okay.
Because you can't fund these ambitious plans with empty coffers.
You can't. You're absolutely right. They're projecting a revenue increase to $44.7 billion, which represents about 22.3% of their GDP.
Right.
And the key strategy here is domestic resource mobilization.
Meaning they're looking inward.
Exactly.
Rather than relying on external aid.
That's right.
But how exactly do they plan to squeeze more revenue out of that domestic economy?
Well, they're proposing a multi-pronged approach. Firstly, they're planning to review investment incentives to ensure that they are attracting businesses without sacrificing too much revenue.
So it sounds like they're trying to strike that delicate balance between incentivizing investment, but also ensuring a fair contribution to the national treasury.
Finding that sweet spot, absolutely.
Right.
And then there's this plan to implement what they call the Domestic Resource Mobilization Strategy. Or DRMS.
Long DRMS. That sounds like something out of a spy movie.
It does, doesn't it?
Can we get a plain English explanation of what that actually entails?
It's basically a fancy way of saying that they're trying to get better at collecting taxes within the country. So think streamlining processes, improving enforcement, and closing those pesky loopholes that allow revenue to slip through the cracks.
A leaky bucket doesn't hold much water, or in this case, revenue.
Exactly. Precise.
All right.
And speaking of plugging leaks, they're also introducing policies targeting tax expenditures and duty waivers. This is all about reducing exemptions and ensuring a level playing field for businesses.
So fewer free passes for special interests.
That's the idea.
It sounds like they're trying to cast a wider net and ensure everyone's contributing their fair share. But are there any specific changes on the horizon?
Oh, absolutely.
Like new taxes or fees, anything like that?
They're proposing quite a few legislative changes that are likely to raise eyebrows. One that particularly caught my eye was a scrap metal export levy. Essentially, they're slapping a tax on every kilo of scrap metal leaving the country.
That's a new one. I wonder what the motivation is behind that. Is it purely about revenue generation, or is there the strategic play at work here?
I think it's probably a combination of factors. On the one hand, it's a potential revenue stream.
Okay.
But it could also be a way to regulate the scrap metal industry, perhaps to address environmental concerns or encourage domestic recycling.
Interesting. So it seems like they're trying to hit multiple birds with one stone.
It seems that way.
Are there any other noteworthy changes in the tax landscape?
They're also proposing an increase in the tax-free threshold for personal income tax.
Okay.
So this could provide some much-needed relief for lower-income earners, especially as costs are rising.
That's a really good point. You can't just focus on squeezing more revenue out of people.
Right.
Without considering the impact on their livelihoods.
Exactly. You have to find that balance.
Any other notable shifts in the tax regime?
On the flip side, they're introducing a 5% civil service pension contribution.
Okay.
This means that government employees will now contribute a portion of their salary towards their retirement.
Okay.
Potentially freeing up some budgetary breathing room.
So a bit of give and take.
Yeah.
In the public sector.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like they're trying to calibrate these changes to minimize the burden on individual taxpayers.
Yes.
While still achieving their revenue goals.
It is that balancing act again.
Right.
And they're not stopping there. They're also floating the idea of a sugar levy.
Okay.
Probably to address health concerns.
Yeah.
And tax hikes on those usual suspects. Tobacco, gambling, and alcohol.
The sin taxes.
Yeah.
Always a reliable source of revenue.
Always.
But the potential social and economic impacts need careful consideration.
Absolutely. These are never simple decisions.
Right.
It's about finding that sweet spot between raising revenue and mitigating any unintended consequences.
All right, so we've covered the revenue side of the equation.
Yes, we have.
Now let's flip the coin and talk about spending. Where is all this hard-earned money going?
Well, they're planning to spend a total of $47.4 billion in 2025. Yeah. Which is a 17.3% increase from 2024.
That's a significant increase.
It is.
It seems like they're really putting their money where their mouth is, so to speak.
You're putting on a show.
But what are the key drivers behind this spending surge?
There are a few key areas that stand out. They've allocated funds for civil service pay reviews.
Makes sense.
Likely in response to those pension contributions we just discussed.
You can't expect people to contribute more without some form of compensation.
Exactly.
What else are they prioritizing in terms of spending?
They're also focusing on clearing domestic arrears.
Okay.
Essentially paying off outstanding debts. Mm-hmm. This demonstrates a commitment to fiscal responsibility and could improve their creditworthiness.
It's like cleaning up your financial house.
It is.
Before embarking on a major renovation project.
A very apt analogy.
And speaking of renovations,
yes,
they're also investing heavily in electricity subsidies.
They are.
This is aimed at easing the burden on consumers and businesses, but could strain the budget in the long run.
Potentially a double-edged sword.
What other spending commitments are catching your eye?
Well, they're still grappling with leftover costs from the Organization of Islamic Cooperation.
Right.
Or the OIC.
The OIC.
Remember that summit they hosted a while back?
Yeah.
Well, the bills are still coming in.
The joys of international events.
Indeed.
They can leave a lasting impact on the budget, for better or for worse.
They certainly can.
And let's not forget the elephant in the room.
The elephant in the room.
Interest payments on domestic debt.
Yes.
This is a significant drain on their resources.
It is a big one.
And really highlights the importance of managing debt effectively.
Absolutely. It's that never-ending debt cycle. It seems to come back and bite you, doesn't it?
It often does.
It often does. But in a positive sign, the budget does emphasize expenditure control and cash management.
Okay.
They're talking about moving towards performance-based budgeting, which ties into that whole program-based budgeting concept we mentioned earlier.
Right, the PBB. So it's not just about throwing money at problems, but being more strategic and accountable.
Exactly.
I'm definitely keen to learn more about how they're implementing PBB.
We'll get to that.
But before we get sidetracked by acronyms, let's address the big question. The deficit.
Okay.
They're ramping up spending.
Yes. But is it sustainable? Can they actually afford to be this ambitious?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Quite literally.
Quite literally, the deficit is projected to shrink to D2.7 billion.
Okay.
About 1.3% of GDP.
Mm-hmm.
Whether that's sustainable depends on a multitude of factors, both internal and external.
Okay, so let's break it down. How are they planning to finance this deficit? Are they borrowing more, cutting back elsewhere, selling national treasures?
Well, they've outlined a medium-term debt strategy, MPDS for short.
MTDS.
MTDS. This strategy aims to minimize borrowing costs while keeping risks in check.
Sounds prudent, but what does that look like in practice?
They're facing pressure from refinancing short-term debt and dealing with expiring debt deferrals. It's a delicate balancing act.
So juggling a lot of financial plates, as governments tend to do.
Precisely. Their plan is to reprofile debt,
Okay.
essentially converting it into longer-term instrument, and prioritize concessional external borrowing,
Right.
meaning loans with favorable terms. Got it. So they're walking a tightrope, trying to manage the spending the revenue, the debt, all while navigating this turbulent global economic landscape.
It's a tough job.
I could see why you're so intrigued by this PBB concept. It could be a game changer if they can actually pull it off.
It could be. Shall we delve into the intricacies of PBB now?
Absolutely. Let's unpack this PBB and see if it lives up to the hype.
Let's do it. All right, so program-based budgeting, or PBB as we've been calling it, it's more than just a trendy acronym in the world of public finance.
I'm all ears. You've piqued my curiosity with all this talk of PBB being a potential game changer.
Yeah.
But I need more than just buzzwords. How does it actually work, and why should we care?
Okay, so at its core, PBB is about shifting the focus from simply allocating funds to specific line items to actually achieving tangible outcomes.
Okay.
Instead of just saying, we're giving this X amount to the Ministry of Agriculture, PBB asks, what are we actually trying to accomplish in agriculture? What programs will get us there, and how can we measure their success?
That sounds promising in theory, but haven't they already tried this whole PBB thing before?
You're right.
I vaguely recall something from the documents about a previous attempt.
They introduced PBB back in 2014
Okay.
and rolled it out to all agencies by 2017. However, there's a crucial difference this time around.
I knew there had to be a catch. What went wrong the first time?
It seems they weren't consistently using PBB in their budget reviews or presenting those PBB statements to the National Assembly.
So it was more of a theoretical exercise than a practical tool for decision-making.
Exactly. It was like buying a fancy new kitchen gadget, but never actually using it.
Right.
What makes this time different? Why should we believe that they'll actually implement PBB effectively?
Yeah, that's the question.
This year marks a significant shift. They're not just talking about PBB, they're actually putting it into practice. They're using it to improve budget transparency and link spending directly to their National Development Plan, the RFNDP.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this could be a big deal. But how does it actually translate into real-world action? Give me a concrete example.
Okay, so they've started with 4 pilot ministries: agriculture, basic and secondary education, health, and gender, children, and social welfare.
A good mix of essential sectors. It seems like they're testing the waters in areas where the impact of effective spending is most critical.
Exactly. And for each of these ministries, they've created these detailed PBB statements that outline specific programs, how those programs connect to national outcomes.
Right.
And this is the crucial part: measurable performance indicators.
So they're setting concrete targets and figuring out how to track whether they're actually hitting the mark. That's a huge step forward from just throwing money at problems and hoping for the best.
Precisely. It's about accountability and ensuring that resources are actually being used effectively to achieve those desired results. It's about making sure that every dollar spent is actually making a difference in people's lives.
Okay, I'm sold on the concept, but I'm a bit of a skeptic by nature.
Yeah.
Show me the receipts. Give me some specifics about these programs and how they're being measured.
Okay, let's take the Ministry of Agriculture, for example.
Right.
One of their budget programs focuses on increasing crop production and productivity.
Makes sense, considering the Gambia's recent struggles with drought. It's smart that they're prioritizing increased crop production to enhance food security.
Exactly. To achieve that, they're investing in things like providing extension services to farmers, ensuring access to quality inputs like seeds and fertilizers, and promoting the adoption of improved farming techniques.
So it's not just about allocating money. It's about investing in practical, on-the-ground support that can actually help farmers boost their yields.
Yes, but how are they actually measuring whether these efforts are successful?
Yeah, that's the question.
One key indicator is crop yield.
Okay.
They're using data from the National Agricultural Sample Survey to track whether yields for staple crops, like cereals and important cash crops, are actually increasing as a result of these programs.
So they're relying on hard data, not just anecdotal evidence or wishful thinking.
No.
That's encouraging.
It is, and it's not just about production. They're also looking at the entire agricultural value chain.
Okay.
Another program focuses on developing that value chain and promoting market access for farmers.
So thinking beyond just growing the crops, but also how to get them to market and ensure farmers are getting a fair price for their produce.
Yes, and for that program, a key indicator is the number of operational storage facilities.
Okay.
Because if farmers can't store their produce properly, a lot of it goes to waste,
Right.
leading to losses and undermining their livelihoods.
Such a simple thing, but it makes a huge difference in terms of reducing spoilage and maximizing the value of their harvests.
Yeah.
I'm impressed by how much thought they've put into these programs and indicators. It seems like they're really trying to connect the dots between spending and tangible outcomes.
It's definitely a positive sign, and it's the same story with the other ministries. The Ministry of Education, for example, is focused on improving school completion rates, especially for girls,
Right.
and boosting performance on national exams.
That's essential for building a skilled workforce and empowering the next generation to contribute to the country's development.
Exactly. The Ministry of Health is tackling critical issues like maternal and child mortality, access to essential medicines, and controlling the spread of infectious diseases.
These are areas where even small improvements can have a huge impact on people's lives. It's encouraging to see them prioritizing these fundamental health challenges.
And the Ministry of Gender, Children, and Social Welfare is working on programs to empower women economically and politically,
Okay.
reduce violence against children, and improve the well-being of vulnerable groups like the elderly and people with disabilities.
Okay, so they've chosen some crucial areas, and they're being very intentional about setting clear goals and figuring out how to measure progress. But the question remains, is this all just a nice plan on paper, or do they actually have a shot at implementing it effectively? What's your expert opinion?
That's where the rubber meets the road. We've got the raw numbers.
Yeah.
We understand their strategic priorities, and we've seen how they're trying to connect those priorities to concrete actions through PBB.
Right.
But the real test is whether they can translate these plans into tangible results.
Right. We need to look beyond the rhetoric and assess whether those revenue projections are realistic.
Yeah.
If the expenditure allocations are truly aligned with their development goals, and whether this whole PBB thing is more than just window dressing.
Exactly. Let's start by digging deeper into those revenue projections.
Sure.
Do they seem realistic based on the economic context and the reforms that they're proposing? After all, you can't build a house without bricks, and in this case, the bricks are solid revenue streams.
You mentioned they're aiming for $44.7 billion in revenue, and grants. That's a pretty ambitious target. Can they realistically achieve that based on what we've seen in these documents?
That's where the skepticism comes, and their reliance on domestic resource mobilization is a bold move, especially given the economic headwinds they're facing.
So while boosting domestic tax collection is a good idea in principle, the reality might be more complicated.
Precisely. It hinges on their ability to effectively implement those tax reforms,
Right.
streamline collection processes, and crucially minimize leakages through corruption or inefficiency.
Okay.
And let's not forget the external factors that could impact revenue.
Right.
Fluctuations in global commodity prices, or a slowdown in foreign investment.
It seems like there are a lot of ifs and buts surrounding those revenue projections.
There are few.
Let's shift gears and talk about how they're planning to spend that money, assuming they manage to collect it. Do those expenditure allocations seem aligned with their stated development goals?
It's a mixed bag. There's definitely a focus on essential sectors like education, healthcare infrastructure development, and social welfare programs.
Right.
All of these align with the priorities outlined in their National Development Plan.
That's good to hear. It shows they're at least talking the talk.
Yes.
But are they walking the walk? Are those allocations sufficient to make a real difference in these areas?
That's the key question.
Yeah.
While the allocations seem aligned with their goals, the question of adequacy remains.
Okay.
Remember, they're also dealing with significant pre-existing commitments,
Right.
like clearing domestic arrears and covering those lingering costs from the OIC summit.
Right. Those unavoidable expenses can really eat into the budget
They can't.
and limit their flexibility.
Absolutely. And then there's the ever-present burden of domestic debt interest payments.
Of course.
That's a significant chunk of their spending, which underscores the importance of getting their debt situation under control.
They're projecting a shrinking deficit. But that seems heavily reliant on their ability to effectively manage their debt. What's your take on their debt strategy? Is it realistic, or are we looking at a potential debt crisis down the road?
Their medium-term debt strategy, the MTDS, seems reasonable on paper. The focus on reprofiling debt into longer-term instruments and prioritizing concessional loans is a sensible approach.
So avoiding those high-interest short-term loans that can quickly spiral out of control.
Exactly. But the devil is in the details. They need to navigate those expiring debt deferrals carefully and manage refinancing risks effectively.
Right.
And of course, the global economic climate plays a huge role. Any unexpected shocks could throw their carefully laid plans into disarray.
It's a precarious balancing act. They're trying to juggle domestic pressures, ambitious development goals, an uncertain global economic outlook, all while keeping their debt in check. It's no wonder you're so fascinated by this whole program-based budgeting thing. It seems like PBB could be a crucial tool for ensuring that their limited resources are actually being used effectively.
I agree. If they can successfully implement PBB, it could be a game changer.
Yeah.
But it all comes down to execution. Do they have the capacity, the political will, and the data infrastructure to make it work?
So the jury's still out on whether PBB will live up to its potential. It's a promising concept, but there are a lot of potential pitfalls along the way.
A lot of potential.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, who's been diligently poring over these budget documents? Is this a budget you can believe in? Is it a roadmap to a brighter future for the Gambia? Or just a collection of wishful thinking and political promises?
That's the question you need to answer for yourself. We've provided the context, we've analyzed the numbers, and we've highlighted both the potential and the pitfalls. Now it's up to you to weigh the evidence and form your own conclusions.
The Gambia's 2025 budget is a story yet to be written.
It is.
It's a story of ambition challenges and this constant push and pull between aspirations and reality.
Yes.
Pay attention to how those revenue projections play out, whether spending translates into tangible progress on those development goals, and how effectively they implement those ambitious reforms, including this whole program-based budgeting experiment.
It's going to be fascinating to watch.
The Gambia's future hinges on whether this budget is a stepping stone or a stumbling block. The next year will be crucial in determining which path they're on.
And that's the beauty of it. Budgets aren't static documents.
Right.
They're living, breathing entities that evolve in response to changing circumstances. The real test of a budget isn't the numbers themselves, but what happens next. Does the government stay committed to its plans? Do those plans deliver results? Are they adaptable enough to adjust course when needed? These are the questions to keep in mind as you follow the Gambia's journey in the coming year.
It's been a fascinating deep dive into the intricacies of the Gambia's 2025 budget. Thanks for joining us on this journey of exploration and analysis. Until next time.